Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at horses and riding from the inside out. I'm Kirsten Nelson, professional horse trainer, and with me once again is my great friend, Deb Romero, certified Alexander Technique instructor. So today's topic is simple does not mean easy.
I
And
love
I
that.
think we're going to go down the rabbit hole on this one.
I love
So,
that.
how do we distinguish what is simple?
Hmm.
Because simple makes us think it's easy. When we say words like simple or basic, especially when it comes to working with our horses, it sounds remedial. It sounds like
Hmm.
beginner work. It sounds like baby horse work. But I go, there is nothing else but the basics.
You know what it comes to mind when I think of simple isn't easy? It's when you're either trying to learn a new language or learn a musical instrument. It's
Ah,
simple, but it ain't easy.
that's true. Like, I love listening to somebody who's really good on the cello or the violin
Right.
and somebody who's not. That is an angry, loud instrument. I go, oh my God, it couldn't be more night and day, right? Between
Yeah.
somebody who's learning the violin and or the cello and then actually really good on it. I go, ooh, that learning curve is not easy. But
Oh,
if you look at that stringed instrument, there's only so many chords, right? There's only so many strings, I mean, and you're confined to sort of the shape of the instrument, but then how you play it is so complex.
right. It's kind of like a horse.
Well, and that's what I think of
Yeah.
as bodies, whether it's a horse or a rider. I go the more I learned about biomechanics, the more I went down that rabbit hole of learning functional anatomy and all these details, it finally hit a point of complexity where I go, oh my God, there's no way I could influence a horse's body through my aids or maneuvers or training strategies and actually orchestrate this incredibly complex instrument. There's no
Mm.
way, and people who are still thinking of framing the horse, right? Pulling in the head and neck or energetically driving the horse forward into the bit. I just go, they're only thinking in one dimension,
That's a good way to put it.
that
Well, and
somehow
as an
it,
Alexander teacher, to me, it's like they're only thinking of the result of what they want, the outcome, not really concerning themselves with how they're getting there.
yeah, or thinking it's so simple. Like I go, I know what you're doing with Alexander technique is the same. Bodies are incredibly complex. So, how do you work with or make improvements to the coordination of this incredibly complex system? It's actually very simple.
Hmm.
You work with the forces of motion, right? Rather than this intricate biomechanical structure, you're working with forces of motion and you're guiding, and that makes it simple.
Right.
And I go, but we have a three-dimensional machine.
Mm.
So I read something interesting. I just came across it randomly that if we look at it mathematically, X always describes length. So if we look
Ah,
at like X, Y, and Z in a body,
right.
X is the length, Y is the height, and Z is the um, depth.
Okay.
So
I like
that
that.
gives it volume, right? So if we're talking about a three-dimensional body, but X being the length, of course, immediately I thought about what we've always talked about, the axial skeleton. The
Hmm.
X is the length. So for the human, if we simplify this complex axial skeleton, it's a vertical line of force. It's a vertical line of force in relationship to gravity, right? And
Hmm.
vertical goes up and down. Because sometimes when we think of gravity, we only think of the Earth pulling us down. But the Earth orbits around the gravitational pull of the sun, which is above us.
That's a
So,
good point. Yeah. And then there's what people don't think is there's a ground reaction force that for the amount of pounds per square inch we push, we have a ground reaction force that comes back up.
right. So
So that,
vertical is up and down.
yeah,
Yeah. And if X is the first factor, X is the length, which in any vertebrate, any any living being that has the skull, spine, rib cage, pelvis deal going on, they're either horizontal quadrupeds, right? So the organization of that X line of force is just horizontally oriented to gravity,
right.
right? And that's the only difference between a horse and a human. And I go, so that's a very simple, complex, a very simple concept for a very complex biomechanical structure.
And I think there's something you brought up that is so important is we are 3D. You know,
Yeah.
we as humans sometimes think of moving forward or moving backwards or moving sideways, left and right, but there's this whole system within bodies of spirals and
Yes.
tubular. I like to compare it to the torso being like a cylinder. You know, it's got
Hmm.
dimensions. It goes all the way around the body.
I think of it as
Um,
a tree trunk.
a tree trunk. I like
Hmm.
that. Yeah, something that has dimension to it, not just front, back, left, right,
Yes.
but it's a container. And the same thing with a horse, massive
Yes.
container.
And so those three dimensions of X is the length, Y is the height. So with humans, we think of our height in the vertical direction. But with a horse, they're still horizontal. Their height is to the withers,
Right.
right? So Y is the height, and then Z is the depth, which gives volume, right? So, and then you can take those sort of three, that's the scientific dimension. I go, we can make it even simpler and say there's an up, down, a left, right, and a front, back
Yeah, I like that. That makes it simple.
direction. Yeah. And I go,
I
that's a
like that.
very simple concept that's looking at the system in an entirety, right? Because the body is also a closed system,
Right.
right? And so within that closed system, this three-dimensional kind of off the axis of X, right? We have all this depth and height that's sort of like, I always imagine it as this AutoCAD sort of design, right? Like when they show cars spinning around or, those cool X-rays that can go around. I sort of see the body like that. But if we go away from body parts, we are really simply three dimensions of force,
Hmm.
right? So then it kind of just becomes more of a geometric pattern. And I go, that actually is much simpler to work with. But because it's a complex body, that means it's not easy.
No, it's not easy at
It's
all.
not
I mean, can you
easy.
think how, if you just compare cylinders, like the cylinder trunk of the human compared to the cylinder trunk of a horse, that's huge. And
Yes.
and us thinking we're going to put that where we want it?
Yeah. Like we're going to move a rib. I love that when I still hear it all the time. I'm going to push with my calf and my heel and my spur, and I'm going to move the rib cage off of my leg. And I go, that one or two, maybe three ribs that you're affecting with your lower leg, your heel, and your spur is attached to an entire thorax and a section of the spine.
Hmm.
plus all the muscles, and by the way, all the viscera inside,
Oh,
right?
that's a biggie. People don't realize how much stuff is in there.
I know
It's
it's
just
a
a lot of
lot of
stuff.
stuff. Exactly.
I mean, the horse's intestinal tract is as long as a football field.
Yeah. Yes. And
And
their
that's,
heart is huge, their
I
lungs
mean,
are huge, and all of that is protected by the rib cage. And so
right,
it just makes me laugh when somebody's like, I'm going to push the horse off of my leg so that they bend the rib cage. And I go, okay, it can't be that simple. That's too simplistic for the complex machine that we call a body. And so
right.
it,
That, that,
I think that's what sometimes
that's that
people mean by
thinking that,
simple.
yeah, that's the thinking of the linear thinking or that you're not working with a three-dimensional thing. You're trying to, it goes back to my work, you're trying to do a certain thing and not taking on the entire integrity of both bodies at the same time.
Right.
Simple, you think it's the simple, oh, I'm just going to use my leg to move this over here, but it's not that easy. It doesn't.
Right. Because you can't ever, especially with one body in motion, much less two bodies interplane in motion, you can't think in one dimension at a time. It does not work.
Right.
So you really nailed it. And that example of pushing the horse off of the leg is the human thinking in one dimension from the right
Exactly.
to the left or from the left to the right, not thinking of the front back dimension within the forward movement or the vertical dimension of is the weight on the front legs or is the weight being self-controlled by the horse, right? So that
Yeah.
one dimensional thinking is it looks atrocious because I don't like to say simple because simple to me is thinking of a three-dimensional body as three intersecting lines of force. That to me is a very simple concept. So when people are thinking one-dimensionally, I just go, it's not accurate. That can't be accurate.
And I always ask people, this to me is the aha moment. If you go to do any activity, are you shortening to make that happen? Or are you staying in your verticality
Hmm.
or staying in your width?
Right.
Because if you're shortening around the activity, that's not healthy biomechanics. So, that takes on the whole body. If you think you're going to move your horse with your leg, well, your leg is connected to everything up top. What are you doing with all that while you're asking that horse to do something? So,
Yeah. And like I was always really drawn to that Da Vinci um, drawing that he did of the human in the
hmm
star with the
hmm
circle around it.
yeah,
And that's
yeah.
exactly what I'm talking about, is sort of in that paint. I don't think it's a painting. I think it's an illustration he
Yeah,
did.
I think it's an illustration. I've seen it on books.
Hmm. And I just absolutely love it because to me that nails exactly as an image what I see in my mind that is simple. That circle around us is our personal space. That's sort of
Mm,
our little world that's in our self-contained system. And then he shows sort of almost in the shape of a star, which is what I see, that there's a vertical line, right? And then there's these horizontal lines. And then it shows the depth by the way he had the human arms out and the
out,
legs
yeah.
spread, right? So you can sort of see these lines of force crisscrossing through the body and all within this sort of bubble of energy, this round sphere of energy with these lines of force interacting. And I think what you're talking about is when you're shortening, you're bending those lines.
You could look at it that way. Yeah, you're not. and there was a new article out, I don't know where I read it, about eccentrically loading muscles instead of concentrically loading muscles, and how much more effective an eccentric load is, which is staying in your length and your width to achieve whatever you're doing instead of contracting and getting shorter.
Right, because concentric just means a shortening
Hmm.
contraction of the muscle, which is what everybody thinks muscle contraction is.
Right,
But there's
right,
four different types of muscle contraction.
right.
So concentric is the shortening of the muscle fibers and contracting. Eccentric is the lengthening of muscle fibers and contracting.
Hmm.
So,
So as an Alexander teacher, I'm always asking, can you stay in your length and your width and your height and still perform the activity?
right. And that's sort of what I'm saying is,
Right.
can we maintain the lines of force
Hmm.
while we do whatever we do?
Right.
And if you think of a three-dimensional body, right around the middle of the human, in our core, around our belly button, somewhere in that trunk, right? Or that what were you calling it? Cylinder.
Mm-hmm.
Those three lines or more are going to intersect.
Yes.
And that's like a point of balance. So I always, one of my favorite sort of imagined visions is like this star shape of a human over this star shape of a horse.
That's out there.
That's pretty out there,
That's
but I
pretty,
love it.
you're so geeky.
I'm so geeky. But it
It's like,
really
where
does
does that
come
come
down
from?
because if you imagine, like, if you take that Da Vinci illustration
Right.
where he really shows the overlay of the forces of the human body,
Oh, I like that better. Yeah, that
that's
makes
what
more
he's showing.
sense.
He's not really showing anatomy, he's showing
Right.
the lines
Okay.
of force because every little movement in a mechanical body generates force.
Right.
We are little force generators, right? So every movement, there's even a term called the velocity of muscle, muscle velocity,
Hmm.
right? So the forces of movement are generated by the body, whether it's the rider or the horse. So every time forces are generated, force always has a magnitude and a direction. So force magnitude means how much, and direction is what really blew my mind because I go, ooh, we have up and down,
Hmm.
we have left and right, we have front and back. And then with volume, we have these maybe diagonal lines of force, right?
Yeah, like the spirals. Yeah,
Or
diagonal
all
spirals.
points in
Hmm.
between. So it's very complex. So if we just take the essence of a three-dimensional body, we have these three planes. We have a front, back, left, right, up, down, and they all have to work with each other
Hmm.
without losing the integrity of any.
Right. That's the simple isn't easy.
Yeah, it's a pretty simple concept.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it's easy because the body is really complex. So imbalance to me is also equally as simple. It means the lines of those three lines of force have lost their integrity.
Hmm.
So maybe one is wiggling, another one is bending, another one is askew, not quite level or not quite straight. It's more oblique, right?
But that's the simple isn't easy because it's constantly, for me, when I'm in the saddle, monitoring all that.
Yeah, but if
All
we
those
monitor,
forces, it's like everywhere.
right. And so to me, if I were to describe imbalance, it means that those lines of force are everywhere but straight forward and back, straight left and right, straight up and down. It's a dissipation of energy.
Right.
It's forces that are going, that are kind of scattered multiple directions.
I just got this vision of a classroom of kindergartners scattered and running around and
Yes, 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 exactly.
and trying to go, okay,
Yeah,
come on, let's get in. Let's all go the same way.
that's such a great example because it's like, yes, kindergartners running amok during recess or playtime, right? And then what does the teacher do? They're not picking up bodies and stuffing them in chairs. They're organizing the energy of the children,
Of the group, the
of the group.
containment of the group
Right,
into a cylinder. Okay.
right. And they're putting it either in straight lines, rows with desks, or circles, or little
Right?
groups of circles if they sit, or like there's a geometric organization to the energy.
I like that because I think sometimes as riders, we think linearly, to get from this letter to this letter instead of geometrically, how is this whole shape going to get there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even when I did Alexander work, I think it was with Jana, she was talking about the kinesthetic sphere, which we haven't talked about because I can't really find a lot of good research on it,
Hmm.
but sort of this imaginary bubble like Da Vinci drew around the human, five-pointed star human is in this circular orbit. And I love that image because it's like each little body has its own personal space, right? And when you and Jana were working with me, I realized Alexander technique is also not about pushing body parts around to get them back into a mechanical, theoretical, ideal, or this perfect range of motion. It was
Right.
all about force management,
Hmm.
right? And force management is equal to good mechanical function. So organized forces always correlate to ideal mechanical coordination. And poor mechanical coordination always equal crazy, dissipating, hard to ride if it's your horse forces.
Yeah, it's the kindergartners running around the room,
Yeah, that's imbalance in the body is the kindergartners running around the room.
screaming at you,
Yeah.
bouncing off of things.
And so it's just like the rider is the teacher, and if the kids are the
Hmm.
horse, then the rider is the teacher. And what you're trying to do is organize these three lines of force that are just the most elemental planes of a three-dimensional body.
Yeah.
And that's what
Yeah.
actually then influences the mechanical body. But you're leaving room for that individual, whether it's AT work with humans or what I do with horses. The really critical part of working with the forces of motion rather than body parts is leaving room for that unique body to find
Yeah.
its own way.
I have a story around that.
Oh, go. I can't wait.
So I, another Alexander teacher and I got a grant to teach in an elementary school. So this is a great analogy. We had yoga mats. So there was like 15 yoga mats laid out, and these first, no, maybe they were third graders came in, and it was that total chaos. Kids running around, teachers screaming,
That's
Sally,
why
go,
it came
Sally,
to your
go,
mind.
go, ah, ah, ah.
So the
And
teacher screaming is when I watch people kicking with the legs and pulling
yeah,
with the
yeah, it's the
reins.
same thing.
Yes.
So the other Alexander teacher and I looked at each other and we decided to lie down on our yoga mats
Ah,
and just take care of ourselves, be totally calm, organize our own bodies. And I'd say it took 30 seconds to a minute that those kids were like, oh, well, that's different. And then they
ah.
all very calmly chose a yoga mat, no verbal communication, and got on the yoga mats. And we did a whole session for 5 minutes just talking them through constructive rest on the yoga mat. So I think that's a great analogy about how loud we are sometimes and it doesn't work.
Well, it's sort of that ping pong game of action reaction.
Oh, it's a good way to put it.
It's like a horse with excited energy excites a human.
Good
Now,
point.
somebody's got to stop that train,
That
right? Somebody has got to
shut that
stop
down.
that chicken and egg cycle, right? So because we're supposed to have the higher intelligence, it really is up to us to do what you're describing. Like what you described is, again, the simplicity,
Mhm.
understanding this incredibly complex thing of influencing energy from a distance,
Exactly.
influencing other bodies and body coordination, which is those two things take take long books to actually fully grasp and understand
Long books.
volumes of written information. But what you did with the depth of understanding that you and the other teacher had was you went above the action reaction game, knowing
Mhm.
that what you wanted was a calm room. And so you started it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that that simple is not easy is that exact thing of are we keeping it simple in our minds even when we arrive at the barn or are we making it difficult?
Yeah. Because actually, the easiest thing to do, according to human instinct, is when you've got this sort of melee of uncontrolled kindergartners, the teacher was yelling, you said.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's the human instinct to try to gain control.
Yeah.
And what you did, having a deeper understanding of how things really work, having the more complex understanding allowed you to step out of the action reaction game,
Mhm.
right? The sort of instinct clashing with instinct ping pong game. And you went, okay, let me do something simple that will influence the energy indirectly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so 30 seconds to a minute.
Mhm.
I go because kindergartners are still like little animals to me. They're like, and I don't mean that in a bad way.
No, they're just simple, right? They don't have
Well,
all the layers of complication
they're
yet.
not complicated. That's what I
Yeah,
was going to
they don't have
say.
the layers put on yet.
Yeah. Like to me, animals are not less intelligent, they're less complicated
Yeah,
than humans.
they're basic. They're just
And
basic.
and little humans 12 years old and under, maybe 9 years old and under, but definitely in the toddler to 5-year-old range, life is still very simple. They're
Mhm.
not complex yet. And that's why they're animal-like to me. There's a purity there.
There's a purity. I like that.
Yeah.
There is a pure simplicity, purity about that age. Yeah.
hmm Yeah.
Yeah.
Before we come more and more and more complex.
Right.
But that's why I think it also worked, like what you're describing that you and the other AT instructor did is exactly when I'm working on that learning frame of mind concept, say with dangerous horses, horses that are super anxious or really have become aggressive, which is just highly defensive, right? Aggression in a horse means the best defense is a good offense. That's what,
Well,
and true with people too.
that's true.
That's what the fight response is. And so I had a client that had a highly anxious ex-show horse that she had become almost afraid to ride, had lost trust for this horse. And she happened to be a person who also suffered from anxiety, right? Borderline sort of OCD, and I should clarify obsessive compulsive, not an OCD lesion, which is different in ours. Um, but a little bit anxious and a nervous person. And so here we have two matching bundles of anxious
Hmm.
energy. And it's like, okay, we're going to get nowhere fast. Like you're describing the teacher yelling at kids who have high energy. Those two levels of high energy aren't going to get you where you want to go.
Right.
It's just going to feed each other for more energy, more energy. And that's the action reaction game I talk about. So I looked at her and I said, before you ride, or if you don't ride, you're going to get your horse out, sit on the mounting block. I even found some like spa music, meditation music on YouTube. And I go, you're going to sit here and listen to this music for 20 minutes. You're going to sit on the mounting block and just ask your horse to look at you. Your horse can move around or not move. You're not trying to control the horse. But if your horse looks away, you're just going to gently bring your horse's focus back to you. And you have to do that for 20 minutes every day. She ended up wanting to do it for almost an hour a day. She spent
Good.
2 weeks doing that without riding because it started to feel so good to just have no pressure.
The no pressure. Yeah.
Yeah. And let that anxiety just sort of naturally dissipate. So, what was important is that they were interacting because that's where the anxiety was escalating the most, both for
Mhm.
the horse and the rider. So, I said, we got to visit the scene of the crime. You got to go there, but you
Right.
don't have to do anything. You can literally sit there and use calming music or whatever you want until that anxiety comes down.
Right.
And bringing the rider's anxiety down is what then helped the horse reduce anxiety, right? Just like the children can't guide the adults, the
Right.
horses can't guide the riders. We got to dig deep and find it within ourselves in order to get it back from our horses.
Right.
And again, we're just talking about something simple like maintain calm energy, even if your horse can't.
Yeah.
That is not easy.
That is not easy, especially you know, my big mare, I've had lots of history. So not bringing that history up, you know, that horses don't live there. We have we have that capability to go into a post-traumatic stress syndrome from, oh, but you know, these signs are what happened when what happened, but that's not now. So
That actually is true for horses. Like when I've worked with quote unquote difficult horses, some of them have what I would call PTSD.
really,
Absolutely. It's no different because horses have exceptional memories. I think they say second to elephants, but horses have exceptional capacity of memory, but very little, almost no capacity of imagination or future
to think forward.
to think forward. Humans have both memory and imagination, so
Ah,
future and past. That's what makes us more complex. Horses are present or past. So, in other words, when I'm rehabbing behavioral issues, which are always related to dominance of the fight flight nervous system, I have to go to the trigger, right?
mm,
So, the trigger is the memory, the past, right? So, let's say a horse has a really bad memory of being ridden, as soon as they're also sequential. So they know because they have
A,
good
B, C.
memories,
Yeah.
A leads to B, B leads to C, C leads to D. So a horse that had a really bad experience under the saddle suddenly won't stand still at the mounting block, right? So I'll maybe go to the mounting block and work there in the present.
Right.
So
Change that.
I can change the experience of the present. I
I
can't
think
change the past.
that's important because I know we've talked, I get clients who come in and tell me all their past traumas.
Hmm.
Not very often I have a client come in and say, well, let's look at what's going well.
And the amazing complexity of the human brain, and this is why we have to lead the way with children and animals, is because I love putting children in the category of animals. I can't help it. And not in a bad way, you guys. I'm not
No,
calling children animals. I'm just saying the simplicity of children is
yes,
like the simplicity of animals. And that present moment is so critical.
yeah,
Because if you think about it, if you're a horse and you only have past memories and present experience, something bad that happened in the past, you can't imagine it to be any different than what it once was. Humans could, but we don't. We don't, we usually go to the past and kind of imagine how bad it's going to be in the future. We carry the
we
past into
tend
the
to do
future.
that's a tendency. Yeah,
Yeah. But we could imagine a different future.
yeah, a
But the
different
only
outcome.
way to really experience a different future is working in the present. That's
Yeah.
the hard part. Again, very simple concept, but not
Hmm.
easy to do.
No,
To
it
keep,
takes training for that.
to redirect our focus, mental focus,
Hmm.
out of a bad experience in the past to a better imagined experience while we're here right now, that is hard to do.
That's
But
a
it's a
lot of brain power.
but it's a very simple concept.
It is very simple. And
And
and if we could just get to the point that that's okay and just repeat it.
it's what I do.
Yeah,
I
it's
go when
just
I'm dealing with dangerous horses, I don't have to really do anything other than be present.
right,
And some horses, I'm present from the other side of a strong barrier. That's the beginning step is I'm on the outside of the stall or the
right,
outside of the fence, but I'm very present and maybe asking the horse to just pay attention to me. Could we mentally connect with
right.
without you feeling
And that is
fearful?
so simple to them.
It makes sense to them.
It makes sense. But for us, we've lost that. We've talked about the kinesthetic or just the awareness. They're already feeling us, our energy when we're, coming into the barn. I mean, they're already tapping into what we're doing. And for us to manage that within ourselves of checking in, like, can I just check in with me and see where I'm coming from
Mhm.
is huge. It's simple, but it's not easy. Or do we take the time to do it?
I think because it's not easy.
It's not easy.
It is simple.
It is
It's
simple.
very simple to say, like what you're describing in the kindergarten class. How much, how easy was it for you to decide? Once you do the act is easy, but how easy was it
Right.
for you and
That's a
your
really good
friend
point.
to decide, I'm not going to address the cray cray going on in the kindergarten room. I'm just going to lay on my mat.
I
Because
think
then
it,
the human
yeah.
imagination goes, I'm being irresponsible. What if a kid runs out of the room? What if one of them smacks each other upside the head? What if it turns into more chaos? And here I
Right.
am, supposedly I mean, these are the things that flash through our minds so fast that mean it's not easy to do what you did.
Yeah. And it boils down to, can I take care of myself in the craziness?
Yeah,
Can I just say, that's out of my control? Just like you put a barrier in between a horse,
really dangerous
a
horse. Yeah.
really dangerous horse. Can I just be in control of myself
Yes.
at this moment
And
and
that's
allow
what
that space for
that
whatever needs to happen?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
that was the point of
Yeah.
sending out my anxious client with her anxious horse. to sit on the mounting block, listen to meditation music for 20 minutes before
Mhm.
doing anything with her horse.
And it's so it to me it's so central nervous system simple but not easy in the sense of you got to reprogram the
Hmm.
central nervous system and the response to that post-traumatic stress. You've got to have some alternative to go
Well,
to.
and the more I learned about the complex body, so all riders and all horses have the sympathetic parasympathetic nervous system. That's part of being a vertebrate, right? And can be one is usually dominant over the other, right? There is a cohesion, they call it, or a perfect balance of the two, the activity, which again, we're talking
Mm,
energy, we're talking forces, we're
right.
talking, you know, not the structure of the nervous system, the activity of the nervous system,
Hmm.
right? So the sympathetic is the fight flight nervous system, and that affects which part of the brain fires up. It affects hormone levels in the body, right? It affects all of the glandular system, the endocrine system.
Hmm.
It shuts down. If we're dominant in the fight flight nervous system, immunity is instantly suppressed, shuts down. Digestion shuts down, it's depressed, right? The circulation it increases heart rate, respiration, um,
And it
blood,
actually
blood
pulls the
pressure,
blood,
and
yeah, to those organs.
it pulls the blood away from the organs out to the extremities
Yeah.
for fight and flight. So I go, this whole systemic response that happens instantaneously,
It's
it's not in our conscious control,
no.
right? But so I go, the whole learning frame of mind concept that I use is if the body, whether it's the horse or the rider, is not dominant in the rest digest nervous system by a little or a lot, then you really can't change the coordination of the
Exactly.
body, which is what I call finding balance, right? You can't work with this complex system in a different way to overcome lameness or enhance performance or improve the movement of your horse or improve your riding ability. None of that can happen if the sympathetic nervous system is dominating. If that energy is dominating the body, it's affecting all systems of the body.
Yep.
And I go, it's kind of literal. We can't think when we're dominant in fight or flight, right? Because the frontal cortex part of the brain, which the horse has one and we have one, the executive part of the brain doesn't light up in that
Right.
nervous system. The older limbic part of the brain, the instinctual part of the brain, is what lights up in that nervous system. Those are very complex things to understand,
Yeah, they are.
but it's very simple to
It's
go,
just the way it works.
do I
Yeah.
feel calm? Do I not feel calm? Do I feel
Hmm.
different gradients or levels of tension or anxiety? Is my horse feeling tension or anxiety, or is my horse calm?
Right.
What's the energy behind the action, right? So it's not, what do I do if my horse won't track a straight line? I go, well, first of all, it depends. Is there anxiety or tension involved in what you're trying to describe? Because a lot of people, just like you, they tell you what they can do or not do,
Hmm.
or people tell me what their horse can do or not do.
Right.
But the first thing I want to know is what's driving that?
What's behind it?
What's
Mhm.
under it? What's
Yep.
behind it? What's the
Peel the
energy?
layers.
What's the invisible part that's going on
Exactly.
at the same time? And the invisible part is what makes it simple,
Right.
right? Trying to manage the complex part actually is it's not simple and it's also not easy, right?
True.
But all of that understanding, I think like in Alexander technique, I had lessons on how to walk, how to sit, how to stand, how to eat, how to brush my teeth.
Yep.
I go, all of those were very simple acts, but with your help, how I did them in a completely different way made all the difference.
It wasn't easy.
It wasn't easy.
Mm-mm.
No, and it was exhausting. It
It's
was like,
exhausting. You're right.
yeah,
It's exhausting. The work is, it can be challenging.
yeah, because you're really changing the coordination of the body or organizing the three dimensions of a body takes a lot of mental focus
Hmm.
and an internal focus, which we're not used to.
Right. Internal focus. I think that's the biggie to
Yeah,
cap it all off is the human needs to be much more internally focused and not externally focused on doing something.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there's just one last thing I want to add because this is actually sort of what started the conversation that we didn't tape. Um, Simple work with our horses. What is simple work,
My
right?
neighbors think I'm crazy.
I know. I go, everybody wants to get on and either go fast or jump big jumps or
Right.
do really fancy maneuvers. And that's our way of measuring progress. But I go, simple work done in balance is the hardest thing I've ever worked on a
Yeah.
horse.
That's
It
all I
is,
do.
oh
It's
my
just
God, it is so challenging, especially if you're rehabbing lameness or behavior. But simple work is a straight line, a balanced turn, a balanced circle,
very
balance within.
basic.
Right. I go having a three-dimensional moving balanced coordination in the walk, in the trot, in the canter, during transitions, on straight lines, turns, circles, with light aids, because that's what tells you the balance is there,
Is there, right?
right? Heavy aids equal imbalance. Light aids equals balance. Like it's really
Right.
that simple, but it's not easy, right? And the horse doesn't enjoy being heavy any more than we do.
That's a good point.
That's just an imbalance. So I go, something's got to change. But I go, if I can do those simple maneuvers, right? Straight lines, turns, circles, walk, trot, canter, during transitions, in balance with light aids, that to me is the foundation for tempi changes,
Hmm.
flying changes, big jumps, tight turns like around barrels, right? Or any lateral work, dressage maneuvers. I go, if I can't do those essential elements of riding in three-dimensional balance, then doing the fancier stuff, or which we could just say is more complicated work,
Hmm.
I
It's a bigger
go,
question.
it's involving all three dimensions more rapidly.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean? And most people are still thinking in one dimension. Move
that's
my
true.
move my horse
The linear
forward.
effect.
Yeah. Yeah. And we hear it all the time. My horse needs to move forward. My horse needs to stop.
Hmm.
My horse needs to move left. My horse needs to move right. I want to lift my horse's back, not considering left, right, forward, back as being involved in that. So
Exactly.
humans are thinking very much one dimension at a time when it
Hmm.
comes to riding. And I go, it's got to be three-dimensional.
I agree.
Yeah. And to be three-dimensionally in balance in those essential elements of riding, oh, that is not easy.
Well, I'll let you know when I get there.
I know, I'm still working on it.
It's like, oh, 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 that was so close.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, I think we better wrap it up.
Okay.
Anything you want to add?
Nope.
Simple but not easy. I
Simple
love
but
that
not
topic.
easy.
Yes, because that is life.
That is life.
Like we all live, we all get things done, but that doesn't always mean it's easy.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, you guys, thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on the next Horse Geeks podcast.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.